There are lots and lots of examples where people have been supported to do something better and take on a new identity, a new role, other than the one that was given to them. We often hand people an identity. We define it for them, we design it, we custom make it, and then we hand it to them. It's usually the role of a resident or a client or something very similar to that. And then when people reject that in a whole variety of ways, through behaviour or through withdrawal, we wonder what's wrong with them. We never reflect upon ourselves and think maybe we didn't design this right for this person. It's never our fault in the human services. It always seems to be the fault of someone else. Examples are many, and certainly there wouldn't be an example that I would say would be optimal, because again, if we were all to ask that question, how many people do we know with a disability in human services that we would swap lives with? Very few people would probably have a good answer for that. But there are lots of examples where people have come to services with very, very negative reputations and very big files all around that negative reputation, and lots of funding saying that they required extreme amounts of support, who within a year or two were working out in the community in a car yard with no support and doing very, very well. It's been interesting to see examples of services that have tried to change some of their practices to essentially set themselves up to say, instead of you fitting us, we're going to try and fit you. We may not do that great at it, but we're going to try. And the more that's happened, and the more the services try to fit the people, the more incident reports and issues and behaviours, all those sort of things have decreased. With no applied behaviour analysis, no medication, no specialist intervention. We just took them out of an environment that didn't make much sense and put them into an environment that made a little more sense. The other thing that comes with that then is that you set up a very positive cycle, because once you help people escape from client land, across the river into personhood land, people begin to take on a new identity. That maybe I belong here. Maybe I can have that life like my brother. Maybe I can have that life like my sister. Maybe I'm more like them than I thought I was. And that may set up then, a fertile ground within the person for them to take on more valued roles, further reinforcing their sense of self and their identity. I think in so many ways, a relationship is the foundation for everything that you do with another person. So in this sense, if you genuinely want to support someone or help them achieve something that's important to them in their life, the relationship is the foundation stone for all of that. Because if you don't start off on the right footing, anything that you build on top of that is essentially doomed to failure, I think. And I think an important part of the relationships that we build with people have to start with some of the, some fundamental elements that you would have in any good relationship with people. And particularly when you're working with people who may be in a vulnerable situation, who may be under a great deal of stress, under a great deal of pressure, empathising with the situation that some of the people are in can give you the perspective of being able to understand how to be in that relationship with that person. So in this sense, the relationship is the foundation for everything that we do with people. Over a great deal of time in many cases. It's rare that we get to know people well quickly, I think. I'm still trying to figure out who I am, and I've known me for 47 years, so it can take a while. And I think one of the learnings that I've had, or certainly in my time in this sector, has been around an appreciation for the time that it takes to build genuine relationship with people, and to base your actions on that. In this sense, there's no real substitute for spending time with people to get to genuinely understand what's going to make a difference to them, and how you could be of some genuine use, and how you can be helpful, how you can be relevant in their life. That would probably be the primary way we would build relationships with the people we support, and then it's just a matter of being committed to building on that knowledge of the person and of each other, and earning trust. Because too often we assume lots of things with people. Yeah, trust me, I'm here to help you. I'm a human service worker. And we assume, and often that assumption comes with a lot of arrogance, I think, from human service workers or people who work in this sector, in this field. So being able to step back a little bit and have a little humility in the way that you interact with a person and the family, have an appreciation for the situation that they're in and their experience of that situation, is really a critical part of building that trust and building that relationship. And then that gives you the opportunity then to earn the trust of that person and or that family. And if you're serious about wanting to help people or be of some use to people, you really do need to earn that trust. There's no shortcuts around that. I think the element of the factor that there has to be a good relationship between people, there has to be trust between people, is a critical factor in that, and it's the baseline, the starting point for almost everything that you would do, because we're asking families to do a big thing here. We're asking them to turn their back on what 90% of the population are doing, and establish systems and establish protocols and all these safeguards, and ask them to walk in a different direction, often into the unknown in many ways. So it takes a lot of trust for a family to walk that journey with you, so you have to earn that trust. Once that trust is established, then it's about helping that family imagine what an alternative life might look like for their son or daughter. And in this sense, having really good examples can be extremely helpful, because you or I or lots of other people in this sector can talk forever about the benefits of social inclusion. But hearing it from another parent, or hearing their example, or seeing it with their own eyes, carries so much more weight than a lot of words from someone like me. So in this sense, really good examples are extremely helpful, because it helps people not only think that others have done it, but then if they can do it, maybe I can too. And if there's someone who can help me along the way, that I don't have to do it all on my own, then that's another tick in helping people make the decision to move in this direction. Yeah, and I think as long as it's done carefully and thoughtfully, and again in the right spirit, in the right relationship with that family, nothing too fatal can really happen, because it's always easy to turn around and walk back the other way if you really want to. There's probably a couple of, the difficulties will probably come under a couple of categories, I think. They're the elements that come with the structural parts of being part of a structured human service system. And that is, organisations have needs of their own, and sometimes the needs of the organisation can conflict, sometimes quite strongly, with the needs of the people you're here to support. That's always a huge issue that needs to be worked through and considered, and it's not that those incompatibilities will, they will come up. It's a question of how you deal with them at the time. The second question would be around the personal kind of barriers that people face when dealing with trying to build a relationship with people that they support, and sometimes there are people that you can establish relationship with quite well and quite easily, but there may be situations or circumstances where you're just kind of not built for dealing with that situation. It could be around issues to do with violence. It could be around issues to do with children. I would be very not helpful in working with families with young children, because I find that the issues that they're dealing with can be too overwhelming for my character and my nature. But some people are built for that and they thrive on that. I think there's some of the things to be considered when you have to be conscious of the things that may get in the way of building relationship. Yeah, I think there's lots of good examples of people doing things better, and the more good examples that exist tends to create a type of momentum for more and better examples. And so I'm hoping that momentum will continue to build. It doesn't mean that what's happening now is optimal by any means, but is it better than it was 20 years ago when we met? I can say it's easier to find good examples now, but in terms of having a baseline by which to measure, I still think a majority of the people with disabilities that I know, their lives are far from resembling anything that we would consider acceptable for ourselves. Look, they'd be across a whole variety of areas and issues around where people have a significant deficit or poverty of things in their life, and poverty not just in the sense of money, although that is definitely an issue for many people, but a poverty of relationships, especially freely given relationship in their life, a poverty of ability to make choices, a lack of say-so over everyday decision making, even over who supports me in the house that I live. So many of the people who are in Victoria, for example, so many of the people who are living in accommodation options that are funded by services have very little say-so over even the food they eat for dinner that night. And the person that is there when they go to bed won't be the same person they wake up to the next morning. And that must be a very unsettling experience for people to go through, not just once or twice, but in some sense they may never see an end to that. For the lack of someone imagining maybe an alternative to the way that they're living. And people often require that. One of the ways that services can be of significant use in some ways to people is to help them think about, is this the best your life could be? And if the answer to that's no, then we think, well, what would it look like if it was better? And then support people to do that. So being able to give people support around imagining something better and gaining the knowledge around what might exist and might be possible, but then also giving them support to put those things into place are two critical ingredients, I think, to helping people move forward and maybe continue to improve. It's certainly the tide is turning somewhat on that. And often families that you would speak to might start off with a very hopeful vision of what life might be like for their child. They hope very much for a life like any other young person growing up. And again, often speaking to people with disabilities and their families, and we ask them what they want. A common thing that people say is, I want a life like my brother. I want a life like my sister. They don't say, I want a life like the person, like the client who lives in the group home down the road. As people get older, I think, and unfortunately as families and people with disabilities become entangled with unhelpful human service systems, very technical systems, very difficult to negotiate and manage systems, unhelpful ideas and assumptions from professionals, a lot of that hope that people originally had for themselves and for their children starts to become somewhat dampened until it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and people end up in the day service. And then the professionals say, see, I told you, I was right. I predicted this accurately. But what they fail to do is look back and see what circumstances actually forced people down that road. And it would have been perfectly possible for that child to go down a completely different road with the right set of assumptions, the right set of supports, and the right set of helpful information and helpful supports. That child's life could have turned out very, very differently. And you can't necessarily blame families and people for going down these roads, because often the advice they're given is somewhat fundamentally flawed, or they've had very limited opportunity to see or think about anything different, and certainly very little support that if they do get a better idea, who's going to help me go down that road? Who's going to help me pursue it? Because it can often be quite tough to challenge the system and go against the way the status quo. One of the unfortunate things is, I think, in my opinion, is that a lot of these special programs don't meet the need for welcome and belonging and purpose. They may have some small elements of that, but they certainly lack the potential to elicit from people all that they could be. And moreover than that, they can often reinforce on the person a role and an identity that they conform to, which is to turn people into clients. And so people start to adopt the attitude, well, if I'm going to be treated like a client, then I'll behave like a client and I'll assume the identity or role that you've given me. So in thinking about things in this way, often some of the segregated or specific programs that have been set up are not always done around a sense of belonging, although that can be an element. They often have to do with safety and concerns that their children will be safe, and you can't blame any parent for wanting that. It's completely legitimate and good thing to want. But again, we can see quite clearly that this is not really necessarily the case. And there's lots of examples that can demonstrate quite clearly that people with disabilities are far safer in the community than they are in paid services. You are much more likely to come to harm in a paid service than you are in the general community. Much more likely, even if that harm comes in the form of neglect. And that kind of neglect that can really wound a person, can sort of really shut down their spirit, in essence, is a very, very damaging thing, particularly when it's relentless and over a year and 2 years and 10 years and 15 and 20 years. That's a pretty brutal kind of abuse to take. Yeah, I don't think there's any one way, but working on the philosophy of starting with that individual, starting with that person, and trying your best to figure out who are you and who am I, and how can I help you get to where you want to be. So in this sense, sometimes it's a matter of jumping in and seeing what happens and taking it from there. Working, always being guided by the notion that and looking for what are this person's inherent talents and gifts and abilities and attributes, and how can I help show these to someone else in the community. And certainly as service workers in this field, it's very important to be able to see through people, see through a diagnosis, see through an attribute or a trait. Because if I can't see through you to see who you really are, how can I show that to anyone else? So in this sense, this is a critical role of people who support people to be welcomed in the community, to show them the gifts and talents that you can see in them. But you're always going to struggle to do that if you can't see that in the person in yourself. Yeah, well, the values are critical, I think, because much like the bumper lanes on the bowling alley, human services, maybe more than most, need something to act as a guidepost to make sure that they don't go way off tangent with what they're doing and the way they're doing it. And in ethics, equally as important, perhaps more so, because it's what you actually do that really counts. As they say, the proof of the pudding's in the eating. So in this sense, having some sort of guidelines that help you stay focused on the picture ahead and stay true to your course are extremely helpful, particularly in services where there are so many demands made on the resources and the attention and time that might be available to do something for people, there's a lot of competing interests for those resources and that time, and so it can be very easy for the focus and attention of what you're doing to be taken way off track. And suddenly you may find yourself doing all sorts of things, putting great deals of energy and time into things that are not really that helpful to the people you're supposed to be supporting. For myself, I think some of the things that are helpful are around sincerity, being genuine in what you say and more so do. It's no good promising something and delivering something else. It's much better to be honest and say, I can't do that, than to promise something where you're going to let people down and fail. I think it's also very important to be clear about your purpose. And in this sense, reflection and renewal of purpose are very important, both for organisations and individuals. Because again, you need something to act as a beacon to keep you focused in your direction and on the things that you think are important to achieve. Because if we lose focus of what we're doing and why, then it becomes possible to put all your energy into all the wrong things.